Oh, it was a mess at the State House yesterday, and we've got new data on what it takes to actually put a roof over your head in Rhode Island.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Jim Ryczek is here from Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. I think he's a terrific advocate, and he and I agree on a lot of things. We're going to have a different conversation tonight. We're not going to have a debate. I'm just going to kind of go, yeah, so what do you want to do about it? You'll have to stick around to figure out what it is. Greetings. Thanks for tuning into my State of Mind. Let's go to the rundown. Oh, man. I mean, you know the phrase, you can't take them anywhere? That's what the General Assembly leadership is like right now. They are so bottled up, and leader of the pack, Speaker of the House, Nick Mattiello, is he's a wreck. Front page headline today. Here's the big version. Here's the close-up version, as if you need it. Those are big letters there. Lawmakers blast Journal on grants. I am so happy that the Providence Journal is finally and repetitively over the last week or two getting after legislative grants. I just want to make sure, or the grant process in general, I just want you to make sure you understand the difference between the two grant systems. The community action grants, many are very legitimate. They help the homeless. They need to stay in the budget, but they need to be identified in the budget. They need to be debated in the budget. They need to be voted up and down in the budget. And they can't be little fiefdoms like Ray Gallison, the former chairman of House Finance, had, and others who historically had their hand in the trough. Most of the good services that are coming through our taxpayer dollars and the community action grants in this state ought to be in place, just redefined. The legislative grants have got to go. They're the little ditty ones, the $500 to $5,000 ones. They're the ones that the legislators beg for, put on their knee pads to get, bargain away their self-identity as legislators to get the check, cheesy check in the Valley Breeze, hey, you know, that kind of thing. And you, dummy that you are, I love you, but you're dummies when you sit there and you say, hey, look at my legislator, they're connected. They brought home a $500 check. How do I know? I see their cheesy smile in the Valley Breeze. Okay? It's got to stop. Now, the Journal's two-pronged, and I welcome them to the argument because I've been on it for 15 years. The Speaker, very upset about a Providence Journal editorial on the front page, how dare they, the other day, decided that he was going to take the rostrum and beat the tar out of them.
The Providence Journal is a long-standing institution with a lot of history in the state of Rhode Island. I am embarrassed for them, and I would hope that as we proceed, the Journal will go back to putting forth a product that the citizens can be proud of.
I mean, you got to be kidding me. Is there something in the water in Cranston? You can't be that dumb and that obnoxious to think that you can use the People's Rostrum for an editorial response to the Providence Journal. Minimally, Nikki, get into the, go find a seat. Minimally, you should be doing it in your office. You should be calling a press conference in your district to respond. That's fine. You should write an op-ed piece in response. That's appropriate. But using the People's microphone for you to get off on the Providence Journal, it is so low rent. Speaking of rent, we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. It is so low rent obnoxious. It is so third world. It is so out of order. And you know what? Tomorrow we'll talk about Anastasia Williams. We have it on the rundown, guys, but you know what? It'll take too long. Anastasia Williams, the state representative, who I've actually been very fond of over the years, she followed the Speaker's lead, and she took off on Channel 12 because of the report they did on her. We'll follow that tomorrow because that abuse of privilege takes too long to get into. And, you know, and poor Jim Ryczek's here. He's got some data, and he's got a friend who wants to tell a story about, you know, working for a living. So I got to move along. This was a very courageous column. How about that decision on the fly, by the way? I can edit on the fly. Lexi's like, it takes me all day to put that stuff in. And you just throw it out? You just throw it out? No, she's very nice to me. This guy has got some chutzpah. Headline. This was in yesterday's Journal. I read it on the radio and people went nuts for it. A couple excerpts. He's talking about seniority and how it hurts the kids. Put another way, why retain poorly performing employees simply because they've been in the business longer? The twisted assumption in this arrangement is that those who have taught more years are to be protected from layoffs without an eye toward the quality of the work they perform. Moreover, it assumes teachers who have taught longer are better. Another excerpt. Are you telling me that we don't honestly know what constitutes a great, mediocre, or poor teacher? The kids know, the parents know, administrators and guidance counselors clearly know. Shouldn't teachers know? Yes, we do, and we must stop hurting our students. You should go back to the archives of the Journal from yesterday, and what is that? Token teacher? Here's a token teacher passing on. I don't think this is Mr. Mara, but this Michael Mara will invite him into the program. In fact, Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee read the piece and invited him to a forum in June, a public forum to talk about some of these issues. And I think it's so countercultural, I hope that he's okay in the lunchroom. I have a vision of this guy, you know, sitting there with his milk carton and his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, knowing the teachers are going to talk to him. I hope that's not the case. Bad strategy, man. Bad strategy. Hillary is just making all sorts of mistakes. Now, of course, there's always those folks who want to protest Trump and get a little crazy. Here's the headline today on what's going on. There's, you know, Trump won, what, Washington yesterday with no competition, and now he's in California on the stump there. Well, he's fighting an empty paper bag because there's nobody else there. Here's an update on the campaign after we see that headline.
People are listening to Donald Trump and they're wondering what is going on in America.
We defeat Donald Trump by very large numbers.
Technically, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are running against each other here in California, but they barely mention each other. Clinton loaded up her speeches Tuesday with new attacks on Trump.
We are going to take on climate change, which Donald Trump says is a hoax, except when it comes to his golf courses.
She was talking about the Trump Organization's application to build a seawall for one of its golf courses in Ireland, citing global warming, which Trump has called pseudoscience.
The last time that his taxes were made public, Donald Trump paid nothing, zero.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was one of many Democrats Tuesday who went after Trump's taxes and his comments on the housing crisis.
A small, insecure money grubber who doesn't care who gets hurt so long as he makes a profit off it. What kind of a man does that? A man who will never be president of the United States.
Within the hour, Trump was taunting her back from New Mexico.
It's Pocahontas Elizabeth Warren. She said she was an Indian. She said because her cheekbones were high, she was an Indian, that she was Native American.
I don't know where this country is going. I just don't. I'm praying for this country. I hope you're praying for this country. But let me tell you this, attacking Donald Trump for 2007 real estate strategy has got to be the dumbest thing on a national platform I've seen this week. He can swat that one away like a fly. He wasn't running for the presidency back then. He's a real estate mogul. He's looking to buy low, sell high. Trying to nail him with that, it's got to. There's not a citizen going to be moved by that argument. Of course, nothing bothers him, and nothing he says seems to bother those who support him. Pocahontas? He calls Hillary a lowlife? You know, well, maybe you say that at the bar, but I'm not so sure you say that at the campaign rostrum. But you know what? The rules have changed. The bets are off. It's the strangest campaign season in the history of the country, and we'll just kind of go at it that way. So, getting a roof over your head feels like it's out of reach to a lot of people. And the data, according to the Coalition for the Homeless, proves it. Here's a press release that comes out today that tells us some of the story. We've got some data, as we say in Rhode Island, to go over. Tim Ryczek runs the Coalition for the Homeless, and is a good friend of the show. Good to see you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
What's your point?
Well, I think we have to have a discussion about what this report says. For too many Rhode Islanders, in our opinion, it's not just hard, but almost impossible to find a decent, safe, affordable place to live in the state. People who want to stay here, and that's for a variety of factors. We are a very high renter state, so the national average is 36% renters. We are a 40% renter state, so we have more people. Right now, we have very low vacancy rates, just over 4%, and the national average is just over 7%. So when we have more people, it's the supply and demand issue. We have rents that stay higher, so people at the lower end of the economic spectrum find it really hard to find some place to live.
All right, so that's the executive summary. We're going to talk about some of the data, how much an hour you got to work and make in order to be able to put a roof over your head, and we'll have a person tell her story about the challenge. But first, I want to tell you about my friends at Cumberland Kitchen and Bath Design Center. Kevin at Cumberland Kitchen and Bath Design Center says to me, boy, are they busy. And one of the things you need to know is that if you're going to do this thing right, it takes some planning. So if you're thinking, boy, we really love to have a kitchen or a bath in here by the end of 2016, remodeled of course, or we'd like to have it, you know, in the summer or the early fall, you got to get going, because a professional organization like Cumberland Kitchen and Bath Design Center needs to come out, see you, do the measure, work on the design, go back and forth with you, have the project manager, designer report back to you as to how things are going, schedule this thing, and get it done. Here's the good news. They'll schedule on time, and the price will be on budget. How do I know? It was for me. It will be for you. Give him a ring. We'll come back with Jim and some of the data. Stay with us. So Jim Ryczek is here from the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. A report out this afternoon indicates certain amounts of money that one has to make in order to be able to properly afford rent in this state. And Jim just kind of set the table in the last segment talking about this being a high rent state. Can we show some of this? And Jimmy, walk me through some of the conversation here. If you got a big screen TV, you can see this. But what this says is fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $991. Do the math. You got to make that amount of money per hour in order to afford it. Correct?
Right. And what we're talking about here is averages, obviously. So that's the amount that, on average, you have to make to rent in Rhode Island. And we have a minimum wage that everyone knows is far below that. The other compelling fact, I think, is that the minimum wage did rise, and the General Assembly and the governor have been trying to make that go up to help Rhode Islanders meet their economic needs. But concurrently, housing costs have risen. So the gap between what you can afford and what things actually cost is staying the same.
We have some other, we're going to meet a Rhode Island renter working for a living, just to tell her story coming up here in a moment to put a human touch on this. But I just want to see some more of this data. Walk me through some of this. Well, obviously, it's the same formula here, and in Massachusetts, where we have a vast audience, it's $25 an hour.
Right.
So?
Right, much higher, same sort of issues. Massachusetts, however, is, from a policy perspective, trying to do a lot more than Rhode Island is currently. We've come a long way in Rhode Island in the last 10 years, I must say, but Massachusetts has a much more evolved sense of housing being something that is in the public realm all the time.
So what, you got to make $6 an hour more on average in Mass to have a 2-bedroom apartment over your head. You're telling me that their programming is better?
They've made a better dedication to that. They made a dedication to produce a certain number of permanent supportive housing.
Is their homeless issue better?
I wouldn't say better, and it's somewhat apples and oranges when you compare states across the border for some things. I think they're doing more to try to address the issue on a comprehensive way than we've been able to do here in Rhode Island.
And if you want to feel better, you know, your dream state, Hawaii, that should make everybody feel better.
Well, and they're always the outlier because they are such a high-cost state and a destination that everyone wants to go to, so that has a lot to do with it.
And the easiest place to get a roof over your head in America, Arkansas. All right, well.
But I want to point out, too, that in every state, there is a gap between what you earn and what the minimum wage is. So it's a problem for those low-income wage earners who are trying to live off the minimum wage. I mean, that was originally the living wage that the federal government instituted to try and meet that need, but it's no longer a living wage.
Yeah, okay, so that's where some of the historical arguments come here. Listen, it feels antagonistic to shrug your shoulders over this, and I'm not, I don't lack empathy for people who are working for a living, but I am nauseous over the political rhetoric today that talks about the minimum wage needing to be a wage that you can earn a living and raise a family on.
Okay.
It's a disgraceful message. There's an economic reality that we have to get our hands around. Even Bernie Sanders wanting to jack up a minimum wage and Hillary Clinton being dragged along to $15 an hour. still not going to crack the nut.
Not
and
here,
and so
right.
we have to start talking about this in a much more realistic sense, don't we?
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, I agree that the wage issue is a much more complicated issue. We have to, as a nation, as a state, figure out how we're going to solve that problem. But I think we have to admit that the problem exists. So we can ignore it, but it's not going to go away. And the definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing and thinking you get a different result. So we have to do something different. One of the things I'm here to advocate for is one of the things we can identify that we can make an impact on is subsidizing housing for the people at the lower end. It's a good thing to do for the economy. It's a good thing to do for the people. The outcomes are better. I think it's a win-win all around, actually.
Yeah, I don't have much of an argument on that. I just want to have a self-actual. I want an honest conversation about this. I want to. We mix apples and oranges. We talk about in a liberal political sense most often. We talk about minimum wage being an instrument, literally, toward the American dream. Gina Raimondo does it. Every presidential candidate on the left does it. And it's just, everybody knows it doesn't work. It doesn't work. At the same time, you know, I do think, as I said with some of these grants that are so controversial, some of them are homeless-directed funding programs,
right.
And you know, shelters and that kind of thing. I support that.
Right.
Let's get the garbage out of all of this taxpayer spending.
Right.
And I think most people want to see subsidy for people who need a hand up or some kind of assistance.
Right.
But they're getting offended over this argument, this false argument. I think that's a political message problem.
Right. And I agree. It is a political message problem. The fact, again, is that if it exists, and from the standpoint of housing, like, look, our homeless constituency, when they come into the shelter, they are asked, what caused your homelessness? And from the standpoint of problem definition, that's the first indicator that we use to try and figure out a solution. They name two things: income or lack of income, and housing costs. So we have little influence generally over income, what people earn, except helping them within the system to try and get jobs and things like that.
Right.
We do have a lot of influence, though, over the public policy around housing. And the point I want to make here is, we do not think of education, healthcare, infrastructure, roads and bridges as, those are givens in our economy and in our culture. Housing is not a given, and it's one of the things that from cradle to grave, we absolutely need to have.
Well, we'll have more discussion on this. And we want to meet, Jimmy brought a guest along here and wants to talk about her everyday challenge, so stay with us. So we're talking about the challenge for housing in the state, and the data on what you have to make to get adequate housing is out. And for the most part, you got to make $19, $20 an hour full time in Rhode Island in order to be able to get a 2-bedroom apartment. You got to make 40 grand. And if you don't, or if you and a buddy or a partner don't make that amount of money, you've got problems, and then you're looking for subsidy, or you're knocking on the gym store saying, help me. The summary, Steve, we have another chart just to kind of summarize. That one I'm not sure. Which this is a 2-bedroom housing wage. And
the shortfall between.
Okay, so Jim was talking about the shortfalls in terms of what you just see if the lines aren't together, there's a shortfall. But we had a summary page there, I think, that you guys wanted to show just in terms of the amount of money. There you go. Fair market rent right now, $990. It's up, for $30 since last year. So there it is, $39,000 annually. It's about $19 an hour. Now, Kristen Roy is an intern with the coalition, a political sci major at Rhode Island College, pharmacy tech by profession or by just paying the bills?
Means to an end.
Both, right?
Yeah.
So what is your story? What do you want to say about this?
That I can't afford to live here. I would love to stay in Rhode Island, but I can't afford to live here. So we're going to leave. We have to leave the state.
Who we?
My son and I.
You're a single mom. You're going to leave. Where are you going?
Probably Virginia. Ranks higher on that list if you get that data out there, but it also takes into consideration the suburbs around DC, so it's kind of an unfair ranking. But if I go onto any sort of search engine, Zillow or apartments or Realtor.com, anything like that. There it comes up, I put in the criteria that I need, and I get greeted with a, sorry, we have 0 results found for you in the entire state of Rhode Island, and in Massachusetts, and in Connecticut. But I get 172 hits in Virginia, and Ohio, and Pennsylvania.
May I ask where you're living now?
Cranston.
In an apartment that you can't afford?
Sharing the rent with someone.
Sharing the rent. Okay, so what's the moral of the story? I don't want to press too hard. What am I supposed to say about this? What are my viewers supposed to think
I
about
make
this?
a considerable amount more than minimum wage, but I don't make that 1906, and I can't.
Right.
My son's of an age where he doesn't
Right,
need
pharmacy
before
tech,
after school
actually,
care.
pharmacy tech is a really important job at a lot of these pharmacies. I happen to know because my wife was a pharmacy tech for a while. In addition to, she has had a career, potpourri career, and enjoyed that for quite some time, like being with people. But she had the pleasure of our shared income, which is significantly different.
Right.
So that's not a job you can probably pay the rent on, right?
I guess the moral of the story is, for me, and I think a lot of the viewers, everyone knows somebody who's in Kristen's situation, I think, in the state, who is being forced to make hard decisions, whether it's have to take in somebody else to live with, or live with family and friends to make ends meet, or leave the state. And while it might not seem that, you know, living with family and friends is a horrible thing, for most people, being successful in life is having your own place, whether it's an apartment or affording a house to live in. And if we're going to move the state forward and really attract business and economic development and get those good jobs that will pay those wages that hopefully go down into meeting what folks in this situation need, we're going to have to be attractive. We have a great quality of life for the people who can afford it here. I mean, excellent. I sometimes drive around and think, I live here, and I'm so blessed to live here in Rhode Island.
What do you, no, I hear what you're saying. What do you want us to do? Do you want us to do something?
No, I'm not here for you to hear my voice. I'm just here to be the voice of thousands of people who are in the same position I'm in.
Right.
Working hard. I'm working hard. I had a career as a store manager and was fine paying the bills, and decided I wanted better quality of life. So I'm going to go to school and I'm going to get my degree. When I get that degree,
and I admire that.
I still can't afford to live here. So in a political science field, where in a state as small as Rhode Island, I could make so many connections, strings to pull, and network, I have to leave and say thanks for those connections, but I can't afford to stay here. That's unfortunate to me. And Jim talks about it's not a bad thing to have to live with family. No, it's not a bad thing, of course not. But to have that sense of vulnerability if someone else leaves, it's the same as having the fear if you lose your job. I can't afford to stay here. If that person I'm sharing the rent with leaves, are you going to come pay my rent? No, and nor would I expect you to. So what am I going to do? I need to find a place I can not have that vulnerability, that fear daily.
And what we're asking, I think at its core, is that we acknowledge as a state that housing, just like those other areas I mentioned, we don't talk about education having to be funded. We know education has to be funded. For the life of me, why does housing not have to be something we have available to everyone?
All right, it's the $20 an hour question.
Right.
We'll wrap up when we come back. Stay with us. All right, now stop judging what you just heard. Just keep your ears open. I'm trying to do the same. Take a deep breath. I'm going to have Kristen come back next week for a longer conversation if she's willing to do it. Jim's always invited. We'll do something on the radio next week as well. This conversation needs mutual understanding, don't you think? Have a good night.